button.
Hello, greetings and welcome to the Convert Agency Accelerator series. I am very, very pleased to be here. This is going to be the last event in our series for a little bit of time. So let's open with this statement. A/B testing is only viable for websites with millions of visitors. False. You're here for the successful testing for startups and low traffic sites, and will unlock the power of experimentation to grow your low traffic site today. While it is true that large traffic volumes lead to faster test results at a higher confidence, today we're going to learn how startups and low traffic sites can unlock the power of digital experimentation. Described as highly skilled, vastly knowledgeable, with a commitment and passion for people and analytics, and remarkable in his ability to turn data into concrete and useful insights, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Jonny Longden, the Conversion Director at Journey Further. And he'll explain to us exactly how you can effectively and successfully run A/B testing regardless of traffic and volume. So stay tuned. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. The replay for this webinar will hit your inbox in about 48 hours, 36 to 48 hours. We do love questions, so please use the chat box, which I'll moderate, and ask all your questions, and I will pass them off to Jonny at the end of the webinar. Thanks so much, and let's get learning. Hi, Jonny.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
Well, it's duly earned. So I will turn my camera off and let you take it away.
Great, thank you very much. Just sharing my screen. Okay. Great, thank you very much, everybody who's joined so far. Hopefully this is going to be interesting and informative session. As we already mentioned, what we're talking about is A/B testing for startups and low traffic sites, something I'm very passionate about. I've heard a lot over the years people say that optimization and testing is for only very, very big companies. It's also a bit of a misconception that people have that it's for optimizing something that's been done. So that conjures up the idea that, you know, you can only use it when something's already well established and you're going to tweak things. This is all completely false. And in actual fact, it's quite a dangerous myth, because really some of the businesses that will benefit the best from experimentation are the businesses that are in very sort of high growth accelerated phases and are wanting to learn and to develop and to adapt and be nimble and agile. That's really some of the best place that you can do experimentation, and those tend to be startups and smaller businesses. So the fact that they feel excluded from doing experimentation is a real shame, and it doesn't have to be that way. So that's what this is about. So just a little bit on me, first of all. So I'm the conversion director of an agency called Journey Further. Journey Further are a performance marketing agency specializing in three core things: PPC and other biddable media, organic, and conversion. I run the conversion team. I've been in conversion optimization for 13 years, maybe a little bit longer now. And along the way, I've run agency teams. I've been a management consultant, helping the likes of Nike, Manchester United, O2, people like that. And also client side, I built and ran a very progressive in-house experimentation function at Sky within the Agile product teams there, and then joined Journey Further. And I think really, like, you know, what that's taught me along the way is, number one, that experimentation can fuel pretty much everything you do if it's embedded in the right way. but the sheer power of it is awesome, really. Like, what you can deliver by experimenting, what you can learn and what you can achieve is great. And really, it's my passion to help people benefit like that and help them embed it in their businesses. What I'm going to talk to you about today is, first, why should you do experimentation, first of all? Like, what is the benefit of it, and how should you think about it? Because in actual fact, the vast majority of people in the world misunderstand and misuse A/B testing and CRO for all sorts of different reasons. I'll give you my take on what it really is. Number two, what are the essential components of embedding that in the business? What are the things that you need to think about in order to start using experimentation to drive what you're doing? And then finally, really the bit that most people probably here to hear is, how do you do that when traffic is low? Concretely, what are the things that you need to consider when your traffic is low? So let's just move on. So why experiment? Well, this stat, I absolutely love this stat, and I talk about it a lot. This actually comes from a very hard piece of research. So there was a study done at Harvard Business School where one of the professors there got his hands on a lot of data, of experiment data that had been run, literally hundreds of thousands of tests that had been run over many years in different countries by different clients. And he was able to tell them that, overarchingly, that of all those hundreds of thousands of tests that had been run, only 1 in 10 of them actually produced a positive result. And that's just a hugely enormous piece of information, because you think there's hundreds of thousands of things that people thought were a good idea and wanted to do to their website, and only 1 in 10 of them actually worked. And what that means is that if you're not experimenting, there's a very, very good chance that 90%, possibly even more, of the stuff that you do to your website, to your content or the functionality of the website, 90% of it is probably a waste of money. And some of that will even be worse. It will actually damage your conversion rate. And when you've run tests for many years, like I have, you don't need a stat like this to tell you this, because you see it every single day. Every day we conclude tests where you would think that there was no way that could possibly fail. It looks like a no-brainer. It's just really obvious it's going to work, and it will either do nothing or it will have a negative impact. That happens all the time. And you just cannot guess what to do to your website. You just can't guess what's going to work. It doesn't matter how much of a best practice it is or how much of an expert told you about it. There's a good chance it won't work, and you have to experiment in order to understand these things that do and don't work. And that's really the basic fact of it. And the answer is to test everything, and to try and get to a place where you can test everything. But the other thing about it is there's an economic benefit to it, which is worth understanding. A lot of people misunderstand what is typically called CRO and think of it a bit like a channel where, we could spend some money on this. What are we going to get back from it? And that's the wrong way to look at it. And really, it's a kind of risk management for your business. And it's a kind of a way of de-risking your effort and spend and time that you're going to put into developing different parts of the business. And this should help explain that. So imagine you have 10 things that you want to do to your website. They don't even have to be about your website. They could be about different marketing channels or strategic things like going into new markets. But, like, let's assume it's a website. So let's say you've got 10 things that you want to do to your website. Now, those will have a positive or negative impact on the website, or they won't do anything. And I'm probably being a bit overly positive here with 2 that are working, because as we saw from that stat, there's probably only 1 that would work. However, a couple of those things will work and will generate you some revenue. Most of them won't do anything. Some of them will have a negative impact. And so in this case, the net impact of that is £95,000 in this rate. You've made a little bit of money from the net impact of all those things. But the fact of the matter is if you hadn't done all the things that didn't work, then you would have saved a lot of money, because all of these ideas have cost you money to develop. So you've spent £35,000 to develop these 10 things, and you've got, a positive return on that investment. But the fact of the matter is that had you not done all of the 8 things that didn't work, it would have been way better. And so that is really what experimentation is doing. It's simply making sure that what you do, what you go and do to your website, what you invest time and effort in from a dev point of view or whatever content development point of view, you know what you're doing is actually going to deliver value, and you're only doing the things that are going to deliver value. And the other interesting part about this, which is this bottom line, is that you test each of these different ideas, and only the things that are proven successful go into development. So you're only actually spending development cost on the things that work. But very importantly, you'll see here, it is cheaper to test things than it is to develop them. So this is a really interesting point that a lot of people don't really get, which is you can build a testing and A/B testing tool far more efficiently and cheaply than if you gave that to a dev agency or to an in-house dev to do. And that's because there is a real different process to building a testing and A/B testing tool than there is to building it in production dev. And there's a lot less security protocol and things like that that go with it. So it's a really much more efficient way of quickly testing ideas and then only doing what works. So it's really important that that's a fundamental part of how you understand it. And really, like I say, just going back to it, you're risk managing. You're taking the risk out of your business of wasting time and effort doing things that may not work. The next really important part about it is that experimentation is a source of innovation and learning. And this, again, is what gets missed by a lot of people as they do it. People will start running tests on websites, and it feels like you're kind of looking for things that are going to win. Like, let's test this. If it wins, great, we've got a winner. But that misses the point. The point is that you can drive innovation in your entire business, and you can drive development of your business by learning from everything. And a test which doesn't win is just as valuable as one that does win, because really the outcome is learning. If you run a test and it has a negative impact on your site, and you properly research that test afterwards, you can learn something incredibly valuable about why that happened and come up with an idea for something to do something else about it. So really, like, you can liken the process of experimentation to scientific experimentation. And there's a really kind of key point here, which is that if you think about anything remarkable that's ever happened in the human race, like space travel and medicine and things like that, all these great achievements and great advancements in civilization have generally been as a result of a scientific method and an experimental approach. Nobody launched a rocket into space without experimenting carefully and iterating and using experimentation to learn what to do and to learn how to do it right. But for some reason, nobody thinks that they should borrow that way of working and put it in business. It just makes so much sense. If you want to copy what's had the greatest achievement in humanity, then look to science. And that's really what the process of experimentation is. It's about how you continually learn and develop your business in a way that is actually effective and actually delivering what customers want. So the process of experimentation should be at the heart of what you do and at the heart of how you innovate your business. And the final point is really about Agile. Now, the vast majority of people doing product development, website development, and things like that are using Agile processes this day. Not always, but mostly. And actually, like, although it doesn't really explicitly talk about experimentation, I think the original manifesto of Agile is very much in tune with the principle of experimentation, because on the left here, these are the 4 original pillars of the Agile manifesto. And the 2 I'm calling out are, a lot of people focus on Agile as being a process and a way of working. And that's the top 2 things. But really, for me, the most important point about Agile is it's about customer collaboration and responding to change. And that means that you are adapting your product iteratively to the changing needs of the market, but also to changing understanding of what customers want and how they want to use that product. And that means iteratively evolving based on understanding of customers. And that is experimentation, because all experimentation really is number one, you're using research and data to get close to the customer and understand what it is that they want and how they want to use your product, services, or whatever. And number two, you're experimenting to validate that that is really what they want, and experimenting to iterate your product in the direction of what they want. And that, to me, is Agile. They're kind of the same thing. So, and that is really key for startups, because most startups are working in this way. It really kind of taps into as well the lean startup method and philosophy. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, but all goes hand in hand. And really, experimentation should be at the heart of that. So that's as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about experimentation. But that for me is like how to think about the philosophy of it. And a lot of people don't get that. They think of it as like a little tactical fix, or let's tweak a few things and see if we can get a bit more revenue out of the website, whilst meanwhile just guessing what to do. And you can use the process to really drive at the heart of what you're doing. So what does experimentation function look like in a business that set it up correctly? Well, there are some key things that you need to think about. The first is strategy, and this is a framework that we develop for our clients that we call a performance framework. And really, like, what this is trying to do is understand the real profitability strategy of the business, or the real sort of driving vision of the business, and break that down into different things that you want customers to do and achieve, and ultimately then to meaningfully measure and optimize behavior in a way that is true to that strategy. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just to give you the high level, this is actually based on a client of ours who are an e-commerce retailer. But what's very, very key to their strategy is they manufacture and sell products and predominantly distribute those through Amazon and other third-party retailers. And their website is really a direct-to-consumer proposition, and has a huge cost per acquisition benefit and profitability benefit for them, because if they can get you to buy direct as opposed to through third-party retailers, then they're saving a whole load of sort of commission style costs, or wholesale, things that go with the process of wholesaling. So it's very much like the website is about getting people to understand the benefit of buying direct and becoming loyal to that website, as opposed to buying products from third parties. So this tries to articulate exactly what that means in terms of what you want customers to do and understand, and then how you measure that. And just to give you a concrete example, if you were that business and you were to just say, let's do some PPC, then there's a good chance that you would start running PPC and measuring it based on return on ad spend or something like that, which is quite a generic way to measure PPC. Now, that completely ignores your profitability strategy, because a fundamental part of your profitability strategy is to outrank and steal share from those third-party retailers in external channels. So it's not good enough just that you can deliver PPC at a good return on ad spend. What you want to be doing is stealing share of search from the third-party retailers, because that's how you're going to push your direct-to-consumer proposition. So therefore, by properly mapping that and understanding it, you can see that here at the bottom on the left-hand side, we're saying share of SERP versus third-party retail is a really fundamentally important metric. And if you didn't go through that process of mapping profitability strategy to the different things that you're measuring, and ultimately what you're optimizing, the levers that you're pulling to optimize, then you would miss that out. And so, this ultimately aims at driving at what are the concrete things that you need to optimize in order to deliver against your strategy, and how do you go about it? What's the meaning in those things? So again, I'm not going through it in detail, but hopefully you get the gist. The next part is having a good research and data capability. And if you go back to what I was saying about 90% of what you're doing to your website is probably a waste of money, 1 in 10 things working on a website, you can move that marginally by those ideas coming from research and data. So an agency like us, for example, where we're heavily investing in research and data behind the ideas that we come up with, we might see that the 3 or 4 of the experiments out of 10 that we run will win, as opposed to the 1 in 10. And that's because we're using research and data. Now, again, this goes back to the idea that it's very hard for you to guess what's going to work on your website using your own opinion or the opinion of like so-called experts. When you have customers literally telling you what the problem is through surveys or through customer service data or whatever, then you've got a very different position. You've got quantitative amounts of customers saying, I tried to do this and it didn't work. And that, is ultimately far better than you just going, I don't like the checkout or whatever. So we tend to look at different types of research on this scale where you've got quantitative and qualitative. So that's ultimately like what happened versus why happened. And then macro and micro, either, you're taking a step back and looking at lots of customers or only a few customers. And so, on the top left-hand side, you've got things like digital analytics and heat maps where, you get a really good sense of exactly what's going on with all the data. On the top right, session recording and speed test analysis where you're kind of honing into like individual sessions, but you're still not really, understanding the meaning behind it. And at the bottom, you start to understand why with customer surveys and customer service data, where you're getting lots of data, and then really qualitative on the right-hand side with user testing. So you need to be thinking about like how are we getting this data, how are we processing it, just from the point of view of the tools that you use, but also the skills to do this, and who is it that can analyze all this data. And it can feel a bit overwhelming, but you can always start out small. The key thing is like, you're getting real feedback from customers, and some of the best stuff is surveys because it's both quantitative and qualitative. So that's where usually you should start out. The third part is what we call an operating system. An operating system is essentially kind of a project management tool, but the reason it exists is very important. That once you start coming up with lots of ideas and you have lots of different pieces of research running, and those are all giving rise to different ideas, different experiments, it's all going to get quite unwieldy. So, the first aspect of this tool is that you're able to store all information related to the program in one place, be able to see everything, be able to track everything, but also it's about having a really meaningful workflow. So, really you have multiple pieces of research. How do you prioritize those pieces of research and make sure that the ones you're doing first are the ones that are going to deliver the greatest value? And all the stuff that comes out of that, the different ideas that come out of that, you then need to be processing those and thinking, what do we need to do with each one of these ideas? This needs a bit of UX design behind it. This needs some copywriting. And so, there's a whole sort of workflow that goes with moving things from research to ideas and then ultimately running those experiments. And as you grow with this program, you will have different people collaborating on that. And for me, that all glues together when you have a single workspace, a system, which will allow you to manage all of that information and to manage what's happening and to get an overview of it. In much bigger organizations that we work with on a consultancy basis, this is a fundamental part of how they scale experimentation through the organization, because the ultimate goal in big companies is that you have that you're able to democratize experimentation and allow people to run experimentation, and yet that is governed and overseen by a center of excellence, like a small team who can almost police the process without being a bottleneck. And again, in exactly this environment, this kind of system is how you achieve that. It's how everything sort of glues together. And then another really important part is the skills and resources. So this is just a little bit of a map of how we talk about the skills and resources required to run experimentation. And there are concentric circles here because there are some things that are more fundamental than others, and other things that are a bit more of a nice to have. But it's worth noting, like this when I do it, it will feel like it's almost like a big team. You can in theory have one person who can do all of this. Very hard to hire, but you can. It's not about having lots of different people. It's just about thinking, where are we getting these skill sets from? And if you're really small, then you might pick out the most important things to try and learn yourself. So it's not about creating a big function or team, but however you do it, someone needs some of these skills. The very first one is project management. So just as I said with the operating system, who is shepherding all that stuff? Who who is moving that through and progressing things from being research to ideas to experiments? Who's thinking about that? That can be somebody whose role is something else. It can be a dedicated person, but that is the glue that holds that together. Then on the analytics side, the very next thing is understanding of statistics. I'm going to talk about that today, but for me, that's one of the most important parts of getting this right, and also the easiest way to get it wrong. And so, somebody who understands enough about that. Digital analytics, obviously everybody's got Google Analytics, so that's the fundamental part of how you understand data. Then you've got things like user research and testing, psychology and behavior analysis, and ultimately if you've got customer data programs. So these are sort of where it gets into more kind of nice to have and things like reporting. You've then got the creative side of it. Now you can get very far with experimentation without having in-house design resources and things like that. I mean, there's all sorts of freelance platforms that you can use and things like that. So, often I advise people not to kind of rush into having a lot of in-house resource, but at some point you will come across needing UX design, copywriting, eventually visual design, maybe customer experience design, much bigger companies, and things like design thinking. But at the core of that, at some point you need to design an experience. And then on the tech side, front-end development, and a lot of A/B testing platforms come with WYSIWYG editors that in theory allow people to create experiments with no coding skills. That is incredibly limited, not because of the fault of the tools, because of the fault of the internet, basically. So the internet works on responsive technology, and just fundamentally, the idea of being able to sort of drag and drop things in a code editor, it just doesn't really work with those sorts of technologies unless for very, very simple things. So very quickly you will need front-end development, and most people already have that, but should you be using your agency or in-house dev or whatever, you have to think about it. And there's things like implementing A/B testing tools properly, implementing Google Analytics, where you're getting that from. And at some point, if you're going to get quite advanced with it, like back-end development, if you want to test pricing and things like that, you have to use what's called server-side testing. But at the very core of that is the place to start. Is just to think, if we're going to run experimentation, who's running the show? Who's running the stuff? Do they understand how to measure tests? Have they got enough knowledge of some different analytics tools, or somebody that can lean on, like an agency that can do that? And if we come across an experiment where we're going to need to design something, where we're getting that from and how we're building it, that's the nub of it, really. So hopefully that's a good vision of what experimentation should look like. And down to the sort of thing that we're really talking about is low traffic testing. And the very first thing to understand about low traffic testing is the statistics part. Like, really, how you do it is based on statistics. Now, I'm going to explain the statistics of A/B testing in the best way that I know possible. So let's imagine that you flip a coin. That you really want to know what is the probability of a coin landing on heads or tails. Now, most people would think that's 50-50. It probably is, but it might not be. It might be, it might be slightly different. And so let's assume you want to know what's the probability of a coin landing on heads or tails. And you flip a coin 6 times in order to try and understand that, and you get 4 heads and 2 tails. Now that's totally feasible. It's completely feasible that you could get 5 heads and 1 tail if you flip a coin 6 times. But does that mean that you've therefore shown the probability of coins landing on heads whenever they've been flipped to be 4 out of 6? No, nobody would believe that. Nobody would think that, because you haven't flipped the coin enough times. So you've run an experiment here where you're trying to demonstrate heads being more than tails, being more likely than tails. And your sample size, the data that you've got, is 6 flips. And nobody in their right mind would think that that proved anything, because you've only flipped it 6 times. What's happened is chance has got in the way, and it's showing you an incorrect result. So this is kind of really good way to understand A/B testing, because what you need to do there is understand, okay, one, how many times do I need to flip the coin in order to remove that margin of error? How many flips will give me a result which tells me the accurate probability of coins landing on heads or tails? Now, the only really way you could do that to be completely accurate is to flip it an infinite number of times forever, which is completely impossible, right? But that's the only way you could be completely sure about the probability of coins landing on heads. So given that you cannot do that, you have to choose a number that will give you a good enough result. And that is really an indication of your appetite for risk. So, there is a risk that even though you flip it 10,000 times, your result might not be quite accurate because you haven't flipped it infinite amount of times. So what's your appetite for risk in terms of that being a bit inaccurate? That is what's called the statistical significance. So there's two very fundamentally important things there. The sample size, which is the number of times you flip the coin, and two, the statistical significance. Now, very few people who run A/B testing will properly focus on the sample size. A/B testing tools all give you statistical significance, but statistical significance is kind of irrelevant without the sample size part. And so what I want to tell you is how to properly plan a test. And the way you should do this is you, before running a test, calculate the sample size that you need in order to get a result that's good enough for whatever you need. And so that's like saying, how many times do I need to flip the coin? And the way you do that, you can look up A/B testing sample size calculator on the web. There are quite a few of them. But they will ask you for three things. They will ask you for the baseline conversion rate. That's the conversion rate of the bit of the website that you're experimenting on. So if you're running a test on your homepage of a website, what's the conversion rate of the traffic that is going to see that test? So let's say that's 1.5% or whatever, that's your baseline conversion rate. The next thing it will ask you for is the minimum detectable effect, sometimes called the MDE. And that is what you are testing for. So you need to really be saying, like, I want to test for a minimum of a 5% uplift in conversion. Now, that's a bit of an awkward thing to deal with, because in theory, you should be using whatever is most meaningful. Like, what would be worth us actually doing? So, what uplift in this experiment would be meaningful in the sense of that would generate enough money for it to warrant actually going and plugging that into production. That's what you should really be doing. However, what you often find is that in a lot of cases, anything would be worth it. You'd be like, well, if it made us 50 quid, that would be worth it, because it's not going to cost us anything to actually do. We can do it in CMS or whatever. But the lower that number, the higher the sample size you require. So you have to kind of choose a number. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But the last part is the statistical significance. So that is exactly, as I say, your appetite for risk. And there's a bit of a myth in the industry that always has to be 95%. There's a kind of a standard that, people say it has to be 95%. It doesn't at all. Like, it's your appetite for risk. What that means, if the statistical significance is 95%, it means there is a 5% chance that the result that you get and the conclusion that you take from it is wrong. In some situations, that could be, you could accept 20%. It just depends on what it is you're doing and what your appetite for risk is. Like, it's completely mad to say that every single test in every single business should have the same risk associated with it. It doesn't. So anyway, those three things are what you're going to get asked for when you calculate the sample size required to run the test. And the baseline conversion rate, the higher that is, the less traffic you need. The minimum detectable effect, the higher that is, the less traffic you need. And the statistical significance, the lower it is, the less traffic you need. So these are parameters through which you can design a test for the amount of traffic that you can feasibly get on something. And ultimately, like, you know, really when you're running a test, it's a bit of a playoff to say, you know, what kind of result can we get out of running this test? How confident can we be in this result based on the traffic that we've got? That's it. Like, there's no like, you know, we can't run a test because there isn't enough traffic. You can always run a test. It's just a question of how confident you're going to be in the result. And if you have very small amounts of traffic, you kind of just have to realize that, like, your level of confidence can't be the same as someone with millions of visits. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. You just in a slightly riskier area, and it's still better than not doing it. So there are a few things that you can do in this. So if you remember, I said, like, the baseline conversion rate, the higher it is, the less traffic you need. So in this example, you see here, like, there's a funnel, and this is an experience. Like, say you're testing something on a landing page. Well, first of all, you know, people on the landing page will click through to a product page. They will then add to basket and end up in the checkout. They will then ultimately convert. So your ultimate conversion rate might be 1.5%, but the click through from the landing page to the product page might be 40%. And when you plug that into a sample size calculator, that's going to mean you have a lot less traffic to get in order to get that result. So in this is a real example. If we're trying to test for a 5% uplift with a significance of 95%, to test on that upstream metric means I need 8,200 visits, and to test on the downstream, the bottom metric, means I need 870,000 visits. So already there you can see there's a test that you can run that is way, way easier to get the traffic for. Now, this warning part at the bottom is just simply to know that you are not proving the conversion. By proving that people click through from the landing page, that's what you've proven. You've proven that people will click through the landing page. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will translate into actual conversion. However, when you have small amounts of traffic and you're starting out and you're trying to be dynamic and grow, that is a good tool to use in order to help you understand risk. And it's all about, like, a conversation about the risk. So you can have a conversation internally where you say, we've proven that this is increasing click-through. We're happy with that. You know, that's good enough. But we realize it might not improve conversion. And, you know, it's all about risk. That's what I talked about at the beginning. Like, experimentation is risk management, and it's decision support. It's all data that's giving you information to help you make decisions and to help you understand the risk in the business. So that's the first thing. The second is to focus on research analysis, which I've already said. Now, this is a little bit hard to see. I'll tell you what's going on here. This is a hotel company that I actually used to work for. And on the left-hand side here, what you can just about see is this is the page that you go to when you've searched for dates for a hotel room, and it will show you different rooms. And I used an on-site survey tool on this page, and it popped up and it said, is everything clear about our rates and availability? So this happened if you've been on the page for too long and scrolling up and down a few times, and it said, is everything clear about our rates and rooms? And let that run for about 2 weeks. And when the data came back in, about 60% of all the people who filled it in, which was a hell of a lot, all said, I don't understand whether I get breakfast or not. And although nobody in the business had ever thought of it before, it was just instantly clear what was going on, because this presents a series of rooms with a from rate. And on the right, you can see what actually happens. If you click on one of those rooms, a drop down happens, and it tells you, it gives you other things to choose. You can choose whether you get breakfast or not, whether it's by pay now or pay on arrival, stuff like that. And that's what happens. Now, what was absolutely totally obvious from that data was that people didn't realize that was going to happen. They just thought those were the price of the rooms. And they were like, I don't understand whether I get breakfast. Like, is it a single bed or a double bed? What's going on? And they were dropping off because they didn't understand it, rather than clicking next. So in this test, this is an experiment. All we did was to pre-open the first one. so that you can see what the options are. That increased the conversion rate from this page by about 35% in this case. But that's a really great example of literally tons of customers just typing exactly what the problem is. It's not always going to work like that, because sometimes what customers say and what they do are totally different. But you will increase the probability of the tests that you run working by them being based on that kind of research. So anything where you can get customers telling you stuff will increase the probability that things are going to win. And therefore, your effect, the minimum detectable effect, will be higher, and it's easier to demonstrate actual uplift than if you're testing small, things that have a subtle impact. That brings me on to the next one, which is test really big ideas, especially if you're a startup or a small business. You're in the advantageous position of being like a little speedboat. You can change things, you can adapt the business, you can do different things. So use that advantage and test really big ideas. And I'm sure everybody's heard of the minimum viable product, which is a concept from Agile development. But really, the reason I want to talk about that is one of the biggest ways that experimentation gets misunderstood is that it's about tweaking little things. And, people always talk about changing button colors and stuff like that. I've never in 13 years ever seen a button color test work. It's a very, very subtle thing to change. And if you're testing things like that, you're completely wasting your time, especially if you're a small business. You need to be testing really big ideas. And those can feel like sort of daunting things to test. So a good example would be, completely changing the commercial model of the business, like different pricing or whatever, launching into an international market, stuff like that. These are kind of big strategic ideas. And that's the sort of stuff that you want to be experimenting with. But you can't just kind of launch into a new market as a test. I mean, you can, but, what if it doesn't work? So really, the way experimentation works really well is when you get really big ideas like that and you break them down into smaller things that you can test that don't have as much risk associated with them. So I don't know, let's say you wanted to launch into international markets. A good first test might be, let's just send out some marketing communications to France and see what the response is. And we're going to recognize that maybe people can't buy, or when they get to the website, they're not going to be happy with the delivery fees because it's not, we haven't thought about that. But all you're doing is seeing how people respond. And if the proposition resonates with them in the same way. And if that works, then that's got legs. Let's do the next thing. Let's do the next thing. And so you build up. So if your experiments are based on big sort of bold ideas, then just going back to the statistics, you're doing things that are going to have just by default going to have potentially bigger impact and then easier to run as tests. And then the last part, which I've already mentioned, is accept lower confidence levels. Or the second to last part, where accept lower confidence levels. And you can do this, it's your business, it's your risk, how confident you want to be. And the thing I always try and get people to remember is, even at lower confidence levels, it's still better than not bothering. So if you run a test and you're trying to prove an uplift at 75% confidence, and you prove like a 15% uplift in conversion at 75% confidence, that is still better than just going, this seems like a good idea, let's do it. And on top of it, you're going to learn something from it. The data helps you learn why people behave like that. What else can you do like that? So, don't be, dictated to by the sort of industry standard that says you've got to have 95% confidence. It's all about understanding your own risk profile and being comfortable with what risk means to you. And the very last thing is experimentation is really a form of validation. What I mean by that is, and I mentioned this at the beginning, really, you break down what we do in this discipline. It is, number one, using research and data to understand what you should do, what customers want, how to come up with ideas, and number two, testing them in order to check that those things work in a real world situation. That is just because, you know, when you do research and data, you are interpreting that data in order to come up with an idea. And so even though that's better than just coming up with an idea from your own opinion, it's still your opinion, and it might not work. So the validation part is you know, going out and testing that with customers and seeing if it resonates with them. Now, proper experimentation in the sense of A/B testing is just one particularly good way of doing that. There are other ways you can do that. If you have a small enough customer base, you could just go and ask them. And if you you know, have a really small base, you could do prototype testing in a kind of form of user testing, things like that. The point is, like, all it is, like, you strip away the execution part of it. What you're trying to do is validate that idea actually is a good idea with customers and how they will behave with it. And if you think of that as a concept, there's other ways that you can think of doing that. So, you know, again, you don't have to get hung up on everything being perfect about the experimentation program, because it's still better than not bothering. So there we go. I hope that was useful, and we should have about 15 minutes left for questions, I believe.
We do. We have a few here. So we've got a couple from DM. I have, I guess some people are shy, which is fine. So you say we should tolerate lower confidence levels. How much is too low? Is less than 70% tolerable?
I think in certain situations it is. Like, you know, really the confidence level is about risk and reward, really. Like, so a couple of different situations. Like, imagine you're running a test on the homepage of a website, and if that test wins, then you're going to have to get a piece of web development done, which is going to cost you money. So it might cost you 10 grand to actually put that live. Maybe it's involving something that's got subscription costs associated to it or whatever, and it's on the homepage. So that's got, you know, like, sort of critical potential impact to it, where, like, everybody's coming through your homepage. Mm-hmm. That's got quite a lot of risk associated with it, but also a lot of reward associated with it. So you're going to want to be confident in that. But then let's say, you know, you're running a test on a different page, and if that test wins, you just change it in the CMS. It's not going to cost you anything to do it. It's a relatively low traffic page in the sense that it's not that, and it maybe not that important to the main user journey or something like that. Mm-hmm. Then you can be a lot less confident in that result. Like, you know, you don't need to be as confident in that result. You just want, you know, you want to know really that it's not worse, that it's not, you know, noticeably detrimentally worse. So yeah, why not use 70% confidence? And then there are other examples, even less so, where maybe you're not, the thing that you test, you're not actually going to implement it. You're testing in order just to gather data. You know, like, right. You might just be wanting to learn something that's part of developing some other test. And again, you know, you don't need to be as confident in that. So unfortunately, there's no, like, sort of hard and fast rules that you can give people about, you know, how to use this stuff. It's really it's something that it's something that you know, learn yourself over time about how to understand your own, the way you want to run your business, the way you want to make decisions about with risk and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of interesting but very heavy, complicated things that, like, blog posts that I could point you to about why you can use, you know, 70% confidence if you really want to in certain situations.
Okay. Great. Are Bayesian statistics more suited for low traffic sites?
That's a really good question. I personally don't have really very much confidence in Bayesian statistics at all. For reasons that, like, I won't go into now, but I just, you know, I'm not a hardcore data scientist, statistician. I understand enough about it in order to be able to run A/B testing programs, and I have some very good advisors who are very, very knowledgeable about it. And I just, through years of kind of having these conversations, don't really trust Bayesian statistics. I mean, the aim of it really is to kind of do testing faster, but I think also it gets around the notion of having to kind of predetermine a sample size, but really when you understand it, that is a fundamental part of what you're doing, and also it is, once you really kind of understand it, it's a helpful part of what you're doing, because it helps you to design an experiment based on what you want to get out of it. So can't go into it in a lot of detail, but no,
that's your professional.
I don't think so. Okay. And I'm sure a lot of people would argue against that, but that's my opinion.
they can have it out with you on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. Experiments oriented to measure returning visitors specifically. Is this recommended on low traffic website experimentation?
If that's what the aim of the test is, then yeah, why not? If you're running a test that is intended to get people to come back to the site, then yeah, why not? I mean, you can just accept, really. And all this again, just to reiterate, like, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect in the way that Booking.com do perfect statistics and things. Do you know that size? But it's better than not. It's better than not doing it.
Not doing it at all, right? Okay. In your opinion, what's the difference between CRO and experimentation? Is it a mindset difference, or are there also strategic and tactical differences?
That's a really good question. I could talk 2 hours on that, but
your 10 pence.
So I think CRO is just an unfortunate term and a wrong term for what should be experimentation. But so there is no difference. However, a lot of people who do CRO do it very wrong, and in a way that's sort of what has become known as CRO, and that's why a lot of people go around calling it experimentation, because they're trying to demarcate a proper experimentation practice from what is effectively, a lesser discipline that's not done correctly. So yeah, it's a complex thing, and I'd love to do another session on that. But no, they're not fundamentally different things. They shouldn't be. There's one thing that you're trying to do and do right, and in a way, it doesn't really matter what you call it if you do it right. But
yeah, I'm sure we could have a like some kind of fight ring with 5 different people and talk about this topic for 2 hours. I've certainly seen some Twitter threads that would make people blush. The last one that I have here that was sent by someone who will be watching this on replay is, and I think you answered part of this, but I'm going to read it out word for word. Prioritization is big in A/B testing, and it becomes even more important to prioritize ideas for low traffic sites. So the question is, how would you recommend testers go about this? Are the ICE PXL frameworks robust enough?
Yeah, so I think the ICE, those sorts of frameworks are good. Like,
can I just pause you for a second? Can you break those down for people who aren't as experienced or knowledgeable about what those are? Like maybe if they're just kind of starting.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm not going to be able to remember the exact acronym and what it stands for. But however, it is important to note that they are also completely subjective, because it's you sitting and going through them and going, like, I think the impact of this will be whatever. Mostly that's how people do it. And so really it's a structured way of your own opinion about what you should run first. And there is some other things that you can do around that. Like, for example, you can look at the real potential impact of a test based on where you're running it. So if you're running a test on this page, and that page has X amount of traffic and 10% conversion rate, and then you run a test on another page and that's got 1,000 traffic and a much lower conversion rate, then that one is going to have greater impact just simply because of where it is on the site. So that's a kind of a non-subjective angle that you can bring into the prioritization of like what's the actual physical capability of that test to deliver value. So yeah, it's important to kind of balance the two, but you have to kind of use the subjective element as well. But the other interesting thing is, where did that insight come from? So if that idea arose from, like the example I gave where we were capturing survey data on the site and people were literally coming and saying this is wrong, you can be more confident in that test delivering success than a test that you've come up with based on competitive insight, where you just looked at somebody else's website and thought, I like that.
Right.
So things like that, like where did that idea arise from and how close to customer data was it? Things like that. So, and I think people who are using those frameworks well are building that into those frameworks, but mostly it becomes very subjective, where you just kind of sit through and go, I think that's going to be high impact. I think that's like, effort or whatever. So yeah, the more you can kind of base it on some actual data as well, the better. But prioritization is incredibly important. It's a very important part of how you run experimentation at pace and at scale, because if you have 10 ideas and only one of them is going to work, and the 10th one that you run is the one that works, then you've wasted a lot of time running 9 things that didn't work. So prioritization is what gets you to the thing that will work quicker. And that's why it is so important, because it's how you move the whole thing at pace, and you get the learnings faster and you develop and grow faster.
So if you, so let's say there's someone listening here, either live or to the recording, and they have their low traffic site. What is the first thing that you would recommend them to do, tomorrow morning or Monday morning when they get started, because they're all fired up?
I think about like those sort of components really that I laid out. What does optimization mean in terms of what does performance mean, and what are the things that you will do to improve performance? What technology have you got at your disposal for insight and A/B testing? Like, how are you actually going to do it from a platform point where what are you using? Where's that coming from? Where are you going to get those skills from? And that could be as simple as thinking, well, I'm going to start learning bits of this, from books or whatever. Or things. Those are the sort of bits of work that you need to sort of do in order to create a capability, and then start running tests. So that's for me what I think about. And a lot of the time, like people talk about a culture of experimentation, and you need to build a culture and get senior buy-in and stuff like that. And that's true, but you won't get very far if you don't have something to show. So, I usually say, you got to start out with getting these bits of capability any way you can through free tools or whatever, so that you can get to a point of being able to run some tests or a test and try and get an interesting result out of it. It doesn't have to be a winning result, just an interesting result, like, we've proven whatever. Right. Then you can take that to people and start showing them and start socializing it and start, building, if you need to, if you're in an organization of size where you need to do that. But, that first step is just to sort of beg, borrow, steal whatever you can to get some functionality to just start doing it.
Start somewhere. Bottom line, right? All right, perfect. Well, is there anything that you wanted to add that wasn't covered today, or that is coming to your mind?
I don't think so. I think, just to go right back to what I said at the beginning, if anything, smaller businesses are the ones that need experimentation more, because they're nimble and can change direction, but only with the right sort of validated learning. And that's what experimentation can do. It's just about doing it in the right way, doing it right.
Okay, great. Can you tell us a little bit about your offer for attendees and people viewing this on recording?
Yeah, basically, I'd be more than happy to run a sort of a free half-hour consultation where we can just talk about your business, the specifics of your business, and offer advice on it. Maybe explain a little bit about how we could help. If not, just free advice, really. So, if anybody's up for that, you can get in touch. I believe there's some ways you can do that to book a meeting and stuff. But if not, just connect with me on LinkedIn, reach out or whatever. Do that anyway. I share a lot of content about this sort of stuff.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's great. Well, that's a very generous offer. And I think it speaks to what some people have said about you, about your commitment and passion, and sharing your knowledge. So I really appreciate that. We will be sharing that link to Jonny's calendar in the email that goes out for the replay. And of course, as he mentioned, you are free to connect with him on LinkedIn, where he has lots of really interesting content about this and many other topics related to experimentation. So thank you so much for joining us today for our Agency Accelerator series, Successful Testing for Startups and Low Traffic Sites. And I am really glad that I feel smarter and